Hi, I'm Pastor Josiah Black at Peru First Baptist Church, and you are joining us today for our study in Micah, which is ongoing. And I would suggest, if you are just now joining, that you go back and watch the previous videos. The only reason I suggest that is because Micah, as a book, tends to sort of build. It's like building blocks, and so it's going to be really difficult to jump in here and kind of understand where we are and where we're going without the foundational pieces of the first few studies that we've done. So consider doing that. By all means, if you want to watch this one, watch this one. But if you feel like you're missing something, it might be because you are. So please go back and watch those past ones. So as I said, we're continuing our study in Micah. Today that's going to be chapter 2, verses 6 through 11. And let's hear those now. This is in the NIV. Do not prophesy, their prophets say. Do not prophesy about these things. Disgrace will not overtake us. You descendants of Jacob, should it be said, does the Lord become impatient? Does he do such things? Do not my words do good to the one whose ways are right? Lately my people have risen up like an enemy. You strip off the rich robe from those who pass by without a care, like men returning from battle. You drive the women of my people from their pleasant homes. You take away my blessing from their children forever. Get up, go away, for this is not your resting place, because it is defiled. It is ruined beyond all remedy. If a liar and a deceiver comes and says, I will prophesy for you plenty of beer and wine, that would be just the prophet for these people, or for this people. Now there's a lot here, there's a lot to understand, and there's some things about the way this is presented in some of our English translations of the Bible that actually complicates our understanding even more. And again, this is all presentation. It has nothing to do with the actual content. We know that the Bible is trustworthy. We know it's without error in its original writing. We just sometimes have to do a little work to understand what it's saying. So that's where we have to go today to make sure we get this correctly. So I'm going to look first at verses 6 and 7. And this is actually one of the places where this can get a little confusing, because verse 6, which again reads, Do not prophesy, their prophets say. Do not prophesy about these things. Disgrace will not overtake us. We have to understand that for Micah, they're actually kind of two statements going on here in 6. It looks like these are both things the prophets say, but it's actually the prophets rebuking Micah, and then Micah sort of answering back. And in the NIV and in certain new translations, this gets a little murky, because there's a tendency to want to translate it like it's two statements from these people who are arguing with Micah. But it's actually them talking first and Micah talking second. So it would be easier to understand the prophets as saying, and these are the prophets of the people who are doing the wrong thing. These are the people trying to argue back against Micah. They're kind of saying, hey, don't prophesy about these things. And what the actual statement is, it's sometimes translated, the second part of verse 6 is translated like it's another statement from those same people, sort of re-emphasizing. That's what we get with the NIV here. Do not prophesy about these things. Disgrace will not overtake us. And that's a little bit of a potential misunderstanding. What most Old Testament scholars think is, and there's certainly some room for discussion here, they believe that that is an answering statement from Micah, which is what I implied before. And so instead of a second statement that sounds like, do not prophesy about these things, disgrace will not overtake us, it's actually a statement from Micah that's saying to them, these things are things that have to be prophesied about, and don't treat them like they're secondary things. In fact, one commentator says that the best way to interpret it would be, the first part is, don't give bad prophecies, the people who are actually in the wrong are saying to Micah. And Micah is saying they're not bad prophecies concerning these things. I will not stop saying them. Shame will not be removed. So if you're looking at this in the NIV or in a modern English translation, it might look a lot different than that. Because there's in this particular verse, some translators choose to treat it as if it's two statements from the prophet, the prophets who are arguing with Micah. So I hope you can understand that distinction. This is one of those places where, and we're not, sometimes this can make us a little uncomfortable when there are, seemingly inconsistencies in understanding within the Bible. And we're fortunate that there aren't big ones. For the most part, when it happens in these little places like this, where it's not like it affects our big theological ideas. But here, it does make a difference for how the sort of verses unfold right after this. So verse 7 goes on to say, "You descendants of Jacob, should it be said, does the Lord become impatient? Does he do such things?" And then another statement, "Do not my words do good to the ones whose ways are upright?" So again, verse 7 is actually two speakers, even though it might not necessarily look like that. The first statement is the people who are in the wrong, basically saying, does the Lord become impatient? Does he do such things? So they're arguing back to Micah, God's not going to punish us. He's not going to be harsh with us. He's not going to destroy us because God doesn't do those things. He isn't that God. He's merciful and he's just and he is full of loving kindness and he is not going to wipe us out. And Micah responds, speaking again prophetically, "Do not my words do good to the ones whose ways are upright?" So Micah's hearing this argument, and he's trying to explain to these folks that because their actions are wicked, because they're behaving in ways that aren't honoring to God, they cannot expect that good treatment from God. There'll be consequences for their sinful and inappropriate behavior, for their rebellion against God. So essentially what we have here, I think, is an argument that I think Christians still struggle with today. The idea that, okay, if God is love, then there's no way he's going to do anything harsh. There's no way he's going to do anything hard. There's no way he's going to do anything that will punish sin or put me out for not being in the wrong. So really, I know I'm supposed to live a certain way, but God's not going to do anything because he's love, right? And we know that to be an incomplete idea. These folks are half right. And I think it's important that we acknowledge that God is love. God is mercy. God is loving kindness. God is faithful. God is all these good and wonderful things. And certainly he extends to us unmerited favor through the grace and through the gift of his Son, Jesus Christ. But there's another side to this too. We know that there are consequences for sinful and rebellious behavior. We know that many times, especially in the Old Testament, and especially with Israel, those do come directly from God. So we've got this tension, and I think Christians still struggle to understand that tension. And I think here, these folks that Micah's dealing with are very much standing firm in this idea that God's not going to do anything. And I don't think that it's a sort of mocking perspective on their part. I think that they are so certain of that fact that they think Micah is way off base. They're writing him off just because he's saying, no, hey, listen, punishment is coming from God. Now, we can't go all the way the other way and say that because God is just, or we can't say that God enjoys wanton murder and destruction. We can't say that God destroys willy-nilly, that he destroys without a reason. He isn't just this destructive force that chews up the scenery, and if you make him mad, you better watch out. But it's again somewhere in the middle. It's this tension between a God who is love and a God who is justice. And that is our God all tied up together. And so Micah's trying to correct this overly simplistic understanding by saying, yes, God is all the things you think he is, but he is those things to those people whose ways are upright. So that's the fundamental misunderstanding here of these false prophets who are trying to rebuke Micah. Again, they think because God's love, there won't be punishment. And Micah's saying, no, there will be. And again, I want to anchor you, and I said this last week, and I'll probably say it a lot, that often in these cases, yes, God punishes sin because it is contrary to all good things. It's contrary to his nature. But the reason that he chooses to punish sin so dramatically in these cases is because he is trying to build a people. He is trying to restore relationship with the bulk of humanity. And unfortunately, these people and their behavior is so wicked that it's compromising that possibility. And so God is going to remove them from the board. And look, here's how we know that. If just being in sin was enough for God to immediately clear the board, wipe us all out, we'd all be wiped out. It would be like the flood every time. But God has promised that he's not going to deal with that us that way anymore. It's not going to be I'm wiping my hand across the board, okay? So that's what we're seeing here. God is being more specific and more targeted because he's trying to build a people that walk uprightly and walk righteously so that everybody else in the world can see that and be drawn to him, instead of, oh, I don't like everything that's here, everybody's sinful, I'm getting out, and they're gone, they're done. He's not choosing to do that anymore. And so we see that God's strategy in terms of trying to bring humanity back to him changes as time goes on. God himself doesn't change, but he changes his mind. He changes the way he reacts and interacts with humanity. But he's still just, and there's still consequence for sin and rebellion. Let's continue in Micah, because I went on a little long there. But I hope you understand what I'm trying to communicate to you about theologically what was being argued here between Micah and the prophet. So verses 8 and 9 are a restatement of the problems that Micah is seeing here. So he's trying to hammer home, hey, here are the ways that you're not upright, you're not walking righteously. And it ties us back to that abuse of power idea from last week. He says, lately my people have risen up like an enemy. You strip off the rich robe from those who pass by without a care, like men returning from battle. You drive the women of my people from their pleasant home. You take away my blessing from their children forever. So it's this sort of joint statement about, hey, here are the things I'm seeing, and here are the consequences that they have. So we've got abuses of power. We've got taking of property without care, like they're looting after a battle, but they're doing that to their own people. We're driving women from their homes. So again, there are things happening in this society, not to other people, but to their own people. And so Micah's trying to identify, hey, these are not healthy patterns. These are not the ways you should function. We need to change this. And this last statement in verse 9, you take away my blessing from their children forever. What he's trying to communicate is that because you're behaving this way, there are consequences not only for you, but for your people, for your lines, for everything moving forward. Your behavior is unmaking the thing God is trying to build here. And we need you to stop. We need you to do something different. So that's why verses 10 and 11 come through loud and clear. 10, first of all, is a very dramatic and powerful statement from Micah to these people who are behaving poorly, who are doing it wrong, who are in sin and rebellion. He says, get up, go away, for this is not your resting place, because it is defiled. It is ruined beyond all remedy. So he is both warning these people that they need to get out and that they've ruined this thing, and he's also sort of telling the people who are still trying to hear and follow God that, hey, this thing is probably too far gone to save. You're not going to be able to stay here. Don't stay among the behaviors and the patterns of these people who are in sin and who are in rebellion against God. And then finally, and this is a little Micah sassiness here in the end, when he's describing the nature of these people. If a liar and deceiver comes and says, I will prophesy for you plenty of wine and beer, that would be just the prophet for this people. What he's saying is, all of you are so far, so deceived, so out of whack spiritually, that if someone came up and said, hey, I got a prophecy from the Lord, I'm going to give you lots of wine and beer, that would be the ideal prophet for these people. That's the kind of guy that they're going to listen to right now. So does that make sense? I hope it does. That right now where these people are at, they're only hearing people that are giving them the good news. And I think for us, in our modern context, that's something we have to watch out for. We have to watch out for people who preach prosperity without challenge. We have to watch out for people who only want to reaffirm our positive view of the world, or our notion that we are righteous and other people aren't. We have to watch out for those people who don't encourage us to show humility. And there are a lot of things that we have to watch out for. It is a dangerous season in your life spiritually if you're never being challenged to grow. And these folks would not hear those sorts of challenges. And they desperately need to, because their situation is dire. They are at risk of derailing this whole thing and being utterly wiped out. And that's what Micah's trying to get through to them. So we have to kind of bridge that gap if we want to understand how to apply it to our lives. We're not under a prophecy right now where, hey, destruction or fear are imminent. But as people living in the age we live at, we need to take seriously the challenge to live like Jesus, the challenge to allow ourselves to be discipled and shaped so that we aren't derailing the faith of others, so we aren't making the world around us worse, and ideally so that we can then turn and contribute good and positive things, kingdom building things that only come from the Holy Spirit working through us when we get out of the way. So I hope that makes sense as a connection point. I hope what I've talked about here has helped you maybe understand this passage in Micah a little bit better. And if I leave you with anything, it's this. We cannot run from the reality that sometimes God destroys things. Sometimes he wipes things out. Sometimes he wipes people out. And in the Old Testament, sometimes he asked the people of Israel to go to war in his name. That's real. We can't pretend it's just a big misunderstanding. We can't pretend it didn't happen. But we can do the work of understanding why God did what he did, because he tells us. He's merciful with us. He explains why he did what he did. And that's one of the things that I want us to continue to dig into as we study Micah. But we also can't lose track of the good things that God does, the good things that he does every day, that he continues to act in love and mercy much more than he acts in punishment and in violence. And though we do acknowledge that someday there will be consequence, again, for sin and rebellion, how much more will those who are in relationship with him be blessed? It's an incredible thing. Grace is an incredible gift. And this should point us again and again towards that idea. So if you have questions about these ideas or anything like that, please reach out to me. If you were confused by any point that I talked about, please put your questions in the comments below. I'm always happy to answer and respond. And we're dealing with some really complicated old language, so don't be afraid to ask if you've got questions. Thanks for joining again, and I'll see you next week.